Welcome, viewers and listeners, to episode 5 of my podcast, In This World, a podcast for life's journey through tough times. I'm Lori Jackson, and thank you for joining me today. So, we are in episode 5 of our series on coping with loss, and today we're going to talk about avoiding grief traps. So, I'm going to start by covering a couple of different grief traps that you might fall into. And the key here is that we'll experience many of these things, but you don't want to get stuck in the trap. So, what we're going to talk about are ways to manage yourself through these different parts of grieving and help you to not get stuck. So I'm going to start with grief fatigue. Now, this is real. Our bodies are affected by our grieving. It isn't just our emotions that are going through the grieving process, but our bodies physically are going through it as well. And so it's important to be patient with yourself through this. But grief fatigue is going to leave you feeling exhausted, achy, tired, maybe even like you have flu like symptoms. And then your mind also, you may be forgetful, you may have difficulty concentrating, but those are very common experiences. And we call that grief fatigue. It is real. Your body, your mind are going through this grieving process with you. It isn't just an emotional journey, but it is also a physical one. And this may last for a few weeks or even a few months, but over time, you'll see that things do start to get better. Your energy levels start to pick up some. You're able to focus better. But again, you need to be kind to yourself and to others that you know who are going through a grieving process, just to understand that they need to have some extra consideration and care. And you need to give yourself some grace and care as you're going through this, especially in the first weeks and months. So there are some things that you can do to help alleviate or sort of manage through this grief fatigue. And most importantly, it is to rest. So throughout your day, periodically, give yourself a chance to take breaks, to just sit and listen to some relaxing music or take a short walk, just sit outside, get some fresh air, something that helps you to relax. So, getting that rest throughout the day is very important to helping you keep going and then getting good sleep. Now, I know that's going to sound almost impossible early on. And at certain times, honestly, there are just some nights where it is restless, where you have so much grief and pain and thoughts racing through your mind. But steps like journaling, speaking to someone, taking those actions that will help you so that when you actually do lay your head down, you've got some peace and you're actually able to get a good night's sleep. So, getting sleep, giving yourself time, giving yourself that break throughout the day, these are very important to helping you manage with that grief fatigue. Another thing that I think has been really helpful for me is practicing yoga. I do that every morning as much as I can. Yoga helps me to stay focused on being in the present. And that's a really important skill as we're going through grieving and coping with loss is not to be dwelling in the past and not to be focusing so much on the future and that new future and what it's like without the person, but just to stay in the present. And yoga very much helps you to do that through breathing and motion. These exercises help you to really learn to just focus on that moment, doing the yoga and being very present. And I find that a great way to release tension physically in our bodies. So that's important. And also, it's soothing to our emotions. The breathing really can help us to have that calming effect. And you become aware while you're doing yoga of your thoughts and your emotions. So maybe there's some things that you're avoiding or suppressing, but in that experience of being in that present moment, you get a chance to really look at those feelings and in a way that's very healing and nurturing. I want to give a plug for Yoga with Adriene. That's the free YouTube set of videos that I use to do my yoga in the morning. The sessions last 15 to maybe 25 minutes, so they're not long. And it's just Adriene and her dog Benji. And the love that comes across in those videos is real. And I just highly recommend using that. Of course, if you have other um, videos or other yoga practices, by all means, go ahead and use those. But if you don't have one, Adriene really connects with her audience, and I've again found them to be very useful. So that uh, grief fatigue, what you want to do is take some of these steps to help you manage through that. But just know that it's very natural and very real to experience that as you're going through your coping with loss. So some of the other things that I experienced, one was these pangs of jealousy, where I would hear people talking about their lives and how they have their loved one that I'm missing still in their lives. So in my case, it's when I hear people talk about their children, but more than that, it's really when I hear them talk about their grandchildren, because now that my son is passed and he's my only one, now grandchildren aren't an option for me with my son as their father. And so initially, when I would hear people talking about their grandkids and their kids and all the things that were going on in their lives, I felt jealous. It was hard. I mean, I didn't want to feel that way at all. And in fact, I was kind of taken aback by it. But it is, again, a natural feeling that when we lose that and our future now is changed forever because of it, that we can feel those pangs of jealousy. After losing a spouse or a child, especially, this is something that can be accompanied also with feelings of sadness or feelings of anger. But jealousy is what I was feeling. And grief is complicated. You lose a child or a spouse, you lose a part of your own identity, and you do lose a part of what you thought your future would be. Those are very real things. And that can lead to some intense emotions, of which jealousy is one, for those who still have their spouses or still have their children. One of the traps is doing that comparison, right? So there is really no benefit in saying, well, they have and I don't. So what I did is I really stopped looking at it from that perspective, because it made me feel like I was going to miss out on something. And instead, over time, I have to say, time really helped here, but really making that effort to know that now I'm living those experiences by sharing them with my friends and family. So my sister's daughter has a child, and so that's her granddaughter. And I love seeing pictures. I'm constantly asking her to send me photos, tell me about how she's doing. And I'm finding joy now in that experience. And the same with my friends. I want to hear the stories of how great their adult children are doing, all the things that are happening in their lives. And I no longer feel that jealousy of, oh, I don't have something to share about my son and what's going on in his life anymore. So finding joy in sharing what others are doing with their spouse or with their children is a way of really helping counter those pangs of jealousy. There are times where it can be a painful reminder. So finding yourself in places and experiences at events where it's your everybody's couples, and now you're for the first time not part of that couple experience, and so it's a painful reminder that your loved one isn't there. And so sometimes, especially early on, it may be helpful just to avoid some of those situations. Stay with your close friends and close family, but you don't have to go do the couples dinner that you've been doing for years with all the couples. Maybe you bow out just for a short period of time. Everyone will understand that. And when you're ready, and when you can feel that it's time, you can step back in to those experiences and really appreciate their relationships and be supportive and happy for them. So again, for me, I just have gotten now to a place where I love hearing those stories about how everybody's doing, and those pangs of jealousy are few and far between. So there are some other grief traps that I would like to talk about. One is denying or avoiding. And this is a common practice that people employ in all different aspects of their lives when they go through a difficult time. They just want to avoid dealing with it or act as if, it hasn't happened, or that they aren't really feeling the things that they're feeling. And again, this is maybe for a period of time a normal part of the grieving process. But the trap is if you get stuck there. And eventually, from a physical, mental, and emotional standpoint, it's going to catch up with you. And those feelings are going to come out one way or another. And so, better to acknowledge them, to do that self reflection, to do the journaling, to talk to someone, whatever it takes for you to express what you're going through, rather than denying it or trying to avoid by making yourself overly busy, or by going the opposite, kind of cocooning yourself in and isolating yourself from everyone and everything. Those are extremes, but those are ways that people do work to avoid or deny what's happening. And neither of those are healthy ways to grieve. So, very important, if you find yourself in either of those situations, or you're not really dealing with or talking through your emotions and your grief, just know that it's going to manifest itself, and it will manifest itself in ways that aren't going to be helpful in your life. Grieving is really an important part of experiencing and coping with loss. Another trap is blaming and finding fault, blaming your loved one, blaming yourself. It doesn't bring them back. It can really leave you feeling guilty. So that kind of blame game, again, that's not a healthy way of dealing or coping with loss. And um, what you need to do then is really focus on the good memories and let go of that blame, and hold on to your loved ones. Ask for their support in helping you understand these things, but make sure it's someone who's got a good head on their shoulders, and they'll give you solid advice. Some people can actually come to you and say things that aren't helpful. So you want to make sure that you're not allowing in people who will blame your loved one or who will blame you. None of that's going to help you get through this grieving process. Any way of finding fault at this point is not going to be helpful. And so, if you do find that there is something that you need to forgive, then allow that forgiveness to happen. Or if you feel that you need to be forgiven for something, then acknowledge that, just by understanding that that is the case, that maybe there was something you meant to say and never got the chance. Well, don't blame yourself that you didn't say that thing. I mean, we are all human, and we don't live in a world where we express everything that we would want to before our loved one goes. So I think that the journaling is a helpful way to work through that, putting things on paper and then really examining them. And some of the things that you might find fault for in your loved one who has passed might be things like, well, they didn't take care of their health the way that you had hoped they would, or they had reckless behavior that led to the circumstance leading to their death, or they had struggled with addiction and that led to their death. So there are things where you could say certain actions led to the outcome, and that it may be true. And so we can acknowledge that. But there is no benefit in blaming a person at this point. I think this it's really just a negative way of trying to cope with your loss. And instead of loving and valuing that person for the time that you had together and having those memories, you're putting your energy into, this negative blame game. So that's a grief trap that we want to avoid. And so acknowledging the truth, that's important, but finding fault, pointing out, blaming, none of that is going to be beneficial in the process of grieving. And you can really get stuck if that's where you go. One other grief trap that I want to talk about is having regrets, which, of course, again, these are things that are a natural part of the process, but we don't want to get stuck here. We don't want to get trapped in regrets. If only I had done this or said that, or if only they had done this or done that, right? So allow yourself to explore those thoughts, and one by one, you can go through and either dispel them as a false belief. Ask yourself, is this really true? Is it always true what you're thinking about that regret? Or if it is true and you really regret that you did not get the chance, or um, if only they had done something, then acknowledge it and forgive yourself or forgive them and move on. Getting to that point where you can see what it is that you're struggling with in regret, and finding that place of forgiveness is really critical to being able to move forward out of that regret. Acknowledge the circumstances. The circumstances around things happening are very important. Sometimes people look at things from the outside and they have a certain perspective, but you were living it and you know what was going on, and so acknowledging those circumstances, things that may have prevented you from taking action or doing something, something that caused you to do something that you regretted. But look at those circumstances, because you may find that you were making a good decision at the time and based on the information that you had, and you did the very best that you could, and you come to some conclusions that really do help you find a path to either forgiving yourself or forgiving them. And that will help you to find some peace and be able to move forward rather than dwelling on that past and dwelling on that regret and getting trapped there. And again, part of getting there is holding on tight to those happy memories. I have found that that is one of the best ways to help grieve and put a smile back on my face, is to just remember all the amazing times that we did have together. And there were many. And I'm sure it is true of you and your loved ones as well. So, to avoid falling into these traps and getting stuck, look and see where you are right now in the grieving process and take any of these actions that I mentioned to help you with grief fatigue, to help you with um, blaming others, with regret. You may be underestimating grief, and just sort of trying to brush it off, being in denial or avoiding. All of these are potential grief traps that you can avoid getting stuck in by working through them. Then you'll find yourself in a better place. It's not easy, but it is necessary. And this way you can avoid any prolonged additional suffering that would be needless, and you're grieving in a healthy way. So thank you for listening. And in our next episode, we'll be talking to others who are experiencing grief and coping with their loss and their experiences, and we can learn from them. So I look forward to our next episode, and thank you for joining me. God bless you.